ugly bush has to go!
That's what the HOA president screamed before she walked through my unlocked side gate. She marched into my backyard. Then she lopped my wife's memorial rose down to a stump in 11 seconds. My wife had died of cancer 2 years before. The rose was the only thing in the yard I'd planted with my own hands since the funeral. Heather Whitfield didn't know any of that. What she did know was that I'd refused to pay her $14,000 in fake compliance fees. She decided the right response was to come onto my property while I was out of town and cut down the one thing I loved. What she didn't know was that the saguaro in the corner of my yard had a 4K trail camera mounted in it, and the badge in my inside jacket pocket said Federal Bureau of Investigation. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. To understand how a woman in a coral linen blazer ended up trespassing in my backyard with a pair of bypass loppers, you have to go back 8 months, to the day I moved in. The desert in Mesa doesn't ease into morning. The sun cracks the sky open at 5:40, and by 6 the asphalt outside my garage is already too hot for bare feet. That kind of heat clears the head. I needed a cleared head when we moved here, because for the year before that, my head had been a war zone. My wife Hannah died on a Tuesday in February, 2 years before this story starts. Ovarian cancer. We had 11 months from diagnosis to the funeral. Afterward, I sat in the chapel parking lot for over an hour. My daughter asked me a question in a voice that wasn't quite hers anymore. Are we still a family now? You don't recover from that question. You just learn to answer it with your behavior. So I asked for a quieter assignment. Public corruption and financial crimes, Phoenix Field Office. My boss handed me a folder thick enough to break a wrist. He said, 8 months, move in. Don't blow your cover. Bring me the whole board. The folder was about Cottonwood Hollow Estates. 312 homes tucked behind a wrought iron gate at the eastern edge of Mesa. A saguaro logo on the entry sign. A community pool that looked like it belonged to a hotel. The HOA had been raking in dues from every owner for 9 years. 90% of the assessment money was pouring out the back end into shell companies. Somebody up top was eating. I was sent in to find out who. Ellie thought we were moving for the swimming pool. I let her think that. The first time I met Heather Whitfield, I was unloading boxes from the back of my pickup. She rolled up in a pearl-white Tahoe and lowered the window. The smile she gave me didn't move past her mouth. You must be Caleb, she said, like she was already disappointed. I'm the president of the association. Friendly reminder, your front yard needs to be in compliance within 10 business days. We pride ourselves on harmony here. Harmony. That was the word she used. By the end of the first week, I had a violation taped to my door for a doormat that said welcome. Apparently the font wasn't on the approved list. By the end of the second week, I had a notice for an American flag that exceeded the decorative envelope. By the end of the third week, I had a notice for letting Ellie chalk a hopscotch grid on my own driveway. I read each one. I filed each one. I never argued back. A few times Ellie caught me writing on a yellow legal pad at the kitchen table. She asked what I was doing. I told her I was making a list of things to remember. She thought it was a grocery list. It was a timeline. Every notice, every signature, every postmark. Heather drove past my house twice a day in that pearl Tahoe. Sometimes she stopped at the curb to take pictures of nothing. Sometimes she just stared at the front window. She wanted me to wave and apologize and grovel like the rest of the men on the block. She wanted me to either fold or explode, because either reaction would prove she still ran this place. I did neither. I poured my coffee. I drove my daughter to school. I read every violation letter twice. I underlined every date. I put them all in the binder I kept under the bed. The thing about Karens with badges is that they only know 2 kinds of men, the ones who beg and the ones who break. She was about to learn there was a third kind. The first time I saw the compliance officers, I almost laughed. Almost. It was a Saturday in late August, triple digits at the pool. Ellie was floating on a pink unicorn ring, kicking water in slow circles, the way she did when she didn't want to come out. 2 men were walking down the pool deck in matching black uniforms, black tactical pants, black polos, gold star badges on the chest. From a distance, the badges looked like Maricopa County Sheriff stars. From 10 feet away, they still looked like Maricopa County Sheriff stars. From 3 feet away, you could read the tiny letters along the bottom edge. Cottonwood Hollow Compliance. A private security uniform with a star-shaped metal badge is illegal in Arizona under state code, but only if you know what you're looking for. Most people don't. Most people see the star and assume. The taller one stopped in front of Ellie. "Young lady, can I see your guest pass?" She blinked up at him. "I live here." "All minors require a wristband. Where's your wristband?" I crossed the deck in 5 steps. "She's with me. Ellie, come here, sweetheart." I helped her out of the water and wrapped a towel around her shoulders without taking my eyes off him. His name tag said Hollander. He had a gut and a thin red mustache. He carried himself like a man who'd worn a deputy Halloween costume once and never let it go. The shorter one watched from a few feet away, with his thumbs hooked in his belt. "Sir, can I get your ID?" Hollander said. "You're not allowed to ask me for ID," I said. "You're not law enforcement. I'm acting under authority of the Cottonwood Hollow Homeowners Association." "That's not authority. That's a job title." His jaw moved. The shorter one took a half step forward. From across the pool, an older couple stared at us over the rims of their sunglasses and pretended not to. I felt Ellie's hand tighten around my finger. I felt the heat radiating off the concrete deck through the soles of my sandals. I felt the camera on the pool house roof clicking through frames in a slow, useless loop. There would be no footage of this incident. The HOA controlled that camera. I smiled at Hollander. "If you need to file a report, sir, mail it. We're done here." I turned my back on him and walked Ellie to the gate. She waited until we were halfway across the parking lot before she asked, "Daddy, did I do something wrong?" I knelt down in the hot gravel and looked her in the eye. "No, baby, you did everything right. Some grown-ups pretend to have a job they don't have. That doesn't mean we have to listen to them, okay?" She nodded slowly. "Okay." She was quiet the whole drive home. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat on the porch with a beer I didn't drink and ran the badge image through my phone. I already knew what I'd find. The compliance officer star was a custom order from a uniform supply company in Phoenix, $240 apiece. The HOA had purchased 12 of them. The order had been signed off by a board member named Drew Halverson, treasurer of the association, golfing partner of Greg Whitfield. One of the names on my growing list of people who were going to lose their jobs by Thanksgiving. But that wasn't what made me sit on the porch until 2 in the morning. What made me sit there was the look on Ellie's face when Hollander had asked for her wristband. It was a look she'd worn once before. The first time was in a hospital cafeteria. A doctor told me Hannah had 4 weeks left. Ellie heard the word weeks from across the table. She knew exactly what it meant. I'd promised Hannah, that night, that nothing would ever make Ellie wear that face again. I'd let it happen anyway. Once. That was once too many. The next morning, I drove to a FedEx in Tempe. I mailed a sealed envelope to my supervisor in the Phoenix field office. Inside was a photo of Hollander's badge, a copy of his name tag, and a single sentence on a yellow sticky note. "These people are impersonating police officers. I'm pulling the timeline forward." By the 2nd week of September, the violations had become assessments. By the 3rd week, the assessments had become threats. By the 4th, they'd become a certified letter on HOA letterhead. The letter demanded $14,000 in back compliance assessments and special enforcement fees within 30 days, or a lien would be filed against my home. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hand and laughed for the first time in a week, not because it was funny, because it was so brazen it almost looked confident. $14,000 for a doormat font. I scanned the letter, encrypted the file, and sent it to Lauren Pierce, my partner in the Phoenix field office. Her response came back 4 minutes later. Heather just signed her own indictment in 18-point Times New Roman. Lauren has a way with words. That Wednesday, I left for a deposition in Tucson, 3 hours each way. Ellie stayed with her grandmother in Chandler. I locked the house, set the alarm, and forwarded the camera feed to my laptop. Standard practice, even on days when nothing should happen. Heather walked through my side gate at 11:07 that morning. The trail camera I'd mounted on the underside of a saguaro arm caught all of it in crisp 4K color. I'd put it up 9 feet high, behind a cluster of dead, skeleton wood spines. She unlatched the gate, walked the perimeter of my backyard, and used her phone to photograph every square foot. The patio, the grill, the little gravel path lined with river stones, the window AC unit on the back of Ellie's bedroom, which had been there since before we bought the house. Then she stopped in front of the rose. I had planted one knockout rose bush against the back fence in March, when the soil had finally warmed enough for desert planting. It was the only living thing in the yard that wasn't there for utility. It was for Hannah. She had loved roses. She'd been the kind of woman who could keep a finicky tea rose alive in Zone 9, which is a small miracle if you've ever tried. After the funeral, I had stopped doing a lot of things. The rose was the first thing I'd started doing again. Heather stood in front of that rose bush for almost a minute. Her shoulders rose and fell, slow and theatrical. Then she walked back to the side gate. She came back with a pair of bypass loppers she'd stashed by the trash bins, and she cut the rose bush down to a stump in 11 seconds. I watched it twice, then a third time. Then I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling of the Tucson hotel room for a long time without moving. The rose was not protected by federal statute. The rose was not on the list of evidence in the case I was building. The rose was a small, private, stupid thing. But the trail camera also caught her entering my property without permission. Arizona criminal trespass 3rd degree under section 13-1502, misdemeanor. Combined with the breaking down of a privacy gate, you could push it to 2nd degree, depending on a judge's mood. Combined with the lopping of property, you started looking at criminal damage. And the trail camera also caught her kicking over a clay pot on the way out. A clay pot Ellie had painted at summer camp. With that on the tape, you started looking at a sentencing report that wouldn't be kind. The clay pot had said home on it in 8-year-old purple letters. The shards lay in the gravel like teeth. I drove home Thursday night. I did not tell Ellie about the rose. I told her the wind had broken her pot. She believed me because she was 8 and still trusted me to know what wind could do. After she fell asleep, I went out into the yard with a flashlight, gathered every shard, and set them on the kitchen counter. I taped a label to the counter that said, Exhibit 14C, and added the photo of the broken pot to the binder. Then I sat on the porch and waited for sunrise. The thing about sitting on a porch at 3 a.m. in the desert is the silence. It's so complete you can hear your own pulse in your ears. I listened to mine for an hour. It was steady. It was not afraid. It was not angry. It was patient. The knock came at 11:04 on a Tuesday night. I knew it was them before I opened the door. The cadence was wrong. Cops knock in 4s. Friends knock once and walk in. This knock was theatrical. 3 slow thumps, then silence, then a louder bang, like someone trying to perform an arrest in a community theater production. Ellie was already asleep. I closed her bedroom door. I set my phone to record audio. I clipped my body cam to my shirt pocket, the personal one, not the issued one. Then I opened the front door 6 inches and waited. Hollander stood on the porch with 3 others. 2 I'd seen before. The 4th was new, younger, thinner, eyes that didn't sit still. Behind them at the curb was the SUV with the light bar, red and blue, slowly flashing, in the kind of pattern that only law enforcement vehicles are legally allowed to use. Mr. Brooks, Hollander said, we're here under HOA Safety Inspection Authority. We need to enter the premises. At 11 o'clock at night. There's been a complaint of suspected fire code violations. From whom? That's confidential. I'm sure it is. I kept my hand on the door. Sir, you don't have inspection authority. Your association charter does not grant you a right of entry. You are also not displaying a uniform that complies with Arizona Revised Statutes Title 32. The lights on your vehicle are in violation of Title 28, Chapter 3, and I'm going to ask you to step off my porch. His face changed, not anger, that came later. Something simpler, confusion. He had been expecting a yelling man, or a frightened man, or a man who started fumbling for a phone. He had not been expecting a man who quoted statute numbers at the door in a calm voice. Sir, if you don't comply, we'll have to escalate. You don't have anyone to escalate to, Mr. Hollander. The younger one took half a step forward and reached for the door handle. I closed the door 3 inches, locked the deadbolt with a single audible click, and watched his hand stop in midair through the gap. Have a nice night, gentlemen. I shut the door. I waited. For 4 minutes I listened to them argue in low, hot voices on my porch, One of them mentioned Heather. One of them mentioned a body camera. One of them said the word FBI, then laughed at himself for saying it. Then the SUV doors slammed, and the light bar pulled away from the curb. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then I went into my office. I plugged the audio into my laptop. I uploaded the file to a secure FBI-controlled cloud. At 1 minute past midnight, Lauren responded with a single line. "We've now got recorded threats to enter a residence under false authority." That's the federal hook. The federal hook is exactly what it sounds like. Once you have law enforcement impersonation, plus attempted entry, plus interstate financial fraud, the case stops belonging to local jurisdiction. It becomes a federal racketeering matter under 18 U.S.C. 1962. That's the part Heather never understood. She thought she was running a homeowners association. She was running a criminal enterprise. The next morning I checked the HOA's community portal, the little intranet site where Heather posted neighborhood updates. There was a new post. It had gone up at 12:45 a.m., 40 minutes after the SUV pulled away. Cottonwood Hollow Compliance was forced to abandon a safety inspection tonight after resident Caleb Brooks made threatening statements toward officers and refused to comply with community policy. We are exploring all legal options. The board reminds residents that obstructing safety personnel may result in lien proceedings, withholding of amenity access, and removal from the community. Heather Whitfield, President. I read it 3 times. Then I copied it. Then I printed it. Then I added it to the binder under Exhibit 22A, a written confession of attempted unlawful entry, sent to over 300 neighbors, signed in her own name. It was almost too easy. Ellie wandered into the kitchen around 7, sleepy and barefoot, and asked if we could have pancakes. I told her yes, we could have pancakes. I told her it was going to be a good day. I told her she did not have to worry about anything. I made the pancakes. I poured the syrup. I smiled across the table. Inside, I was already 2 moves ahead. By the start of October, I had everything. I had 3 years of HOA bank statements pulled through a federal subpoena. I had 47 contracts with a company called Whitfield Property Solutions LLC. Landscaping, security, paving, irrigation, lighting, fire safety inspections, even something called community ambiance services. That one came in at $112,000 a year. I had wire transfers from the HOA reserve account to a holding bank in Henderson, Nevada, and from there to a checking account in Greg Whitfield's name. I had photographs of jobs that were billed for and never done, driveways listed as resurfaced that still had cracks I could fit a quarter into. Total siphoned over 6 years, $4.3 million. The whole thing had been hiding in plain sight for so long it had grown a routine. Every quarter, Heather sent a treasurer's report to homeowners. It was a 1-page PDF with 3 numbers on it and a saguaro graphic at the top. No itemized expenses, no vendor breakdown. The board meetings were closed. The accounting firm of record was, I cannot make this up, Greg's brother-in-law in Tempe. When fraud is that loud, it isn't hiding, it's daring you to look. The compliance officers were the third leg of the scheme. The HOA paid Whitfield Property Solutions $9,600 a month for security services. Whitfield Property Solutions paid Hollander and his crew a fraction of that in cash. The badges, the uniforms, the SUVs, all written off as operations expenses against funds that came from homeowner dues. Every fine the compliance officers wrote was funneled back to the HOA's enforcement account, which then transferred by quarterly auto pull to the same Whitfield LLC. Money in, money out, money home, like a fountain that only flowed one way. Most fraud cases get cracked because of a single audit slip. This one was going to crack because of a woman who couldn't help herself. Heather wasn't just stealing, she was performing. She'd built a kingdom on stolen dues and decided she also wanted to be feared. That's the mistake. The smart criminals quietly enjoy the money and never make enemies. Heather made an enemy of every man in the neighborhood she couldn't dominate. And in late August, she'd accidentally made an enemy of one specific man she should have looked up before she started. She had no idea who I was. To Heather Whitfield, I was Caleb Brooks, single father, mid-sized SUV, faded Phoenix Suns hat, vague white-collar job, 3 boxes of moving supplies still in the garage. I had filled out my HOA registration with the most boring profession I could think of, compliance auditor, mid-sized firm. She had looked at that line and decided I was a paper pusher she could roll. She didn't know my actual employer was the United States Department of Justice. She didn't know my actual title was special agent. She didn't know my actual specialty was HOA financial fraud. She didn't know the office I worked in had been waiting 9 months for me to bring her in. She didn't know about the binder under my bed, 86 labeled exhibits, 3 sworn affidavits from former board members, a draft indictment that needed only a signature from the United States Attorney for the District of Arizona. She didn't know any of it. She thought she was the apex predator of Cottonwood Hollow Estates. She had no idea she was the prey. That night, after Ellie was asleep, I called Patricia Hargrove at home. She picked up on the second ring. "Caleb, it's time." There was a long silence on the line. Then she said, "Walk me through how you want this to land." I walked her through it. It was a quiet, 10-minute conversation. By the end of it, we had a date. We had a location. We had a plan. Either it would crash and burn, or it would close one of the largest residential fraud cases in the District of Arizona in less than 3 weeks. Patricia hung up. I sat in the dark of my kitchen and let myself smile for the first time in a long, long time. The plan was simple in shape and intricate in execution. We needed Heather to escalate publicly and on the record. We needed her to order a fake arrest in front of witnesses and cameras. We needed her to do it with enough confidence that no reasonable person could claim she didn't know what she was doing. And we needed it to happen at a place where federal agents could be staged within a 60-second response window. The annual Cottonwood Hollow Fall Block Party was scheduled for the second Saturday in October. Heather had been planning it for 4 months. White tents, catered carnitas, a photographer hired to take community moments, 200 residents expected, local news invited under the pretense of a community service spotlight. It was, in every way, the perfect stage. She had built the gallows herself. The first piece of the plan was the bait. Lauren and I drafted a series of small, controlled provocations designed to make Heather feel like her authority was slipping. We sent a polite letter from a made-up neighbor at a real address, requesting an itemized breakdown of HOA expenses. We had 2 more homeowners, both quiet allies, both unhappy with the board for years, file written complaints with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. We made sure the HOA portal got a calm, polite, anonymous post asking why the security force wore badges that resembled sheriff stars. By the end of week 1, Heather had snapped at the snack bar attendant in the country club. By week 2, she was yelling at her husband on the pickleball court. By week 3, she had sent out 3 certified letters threatening lien proceedings against 3 different homeowners, including me, over invented offenses. We had 3 days until the block party. The second piece was the allies. The man 2 doors down from me, a retired aerospace engineer named Wendell Cantor, had been quietly keeping his own file for 11 years. He had original emails. He had a board meeting recording from 2018 where Greg Whitfield, drunk, had bragged about how the compliance fund was basically a Roth IRA with extra steps. Wendell had been waiting for someone to finally listen. I listened. B. Templeton, a single mom 4 houses up, had received 6 violation notices in 18 months and lost amenity access twice. She had screenshots of every threat Heather had ever sent her over text. She also had a younger brother who happened to be a paralegal at a Phoenix firm that specialized in homeowner rights. She had been ready to sue for a year. She was now ready to testify. The third piece was the legal machinery. Patricia walked the case to a federal grand jury on a Tuesday morning. The indictment ran 26 counts: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and impersonation of a peace officer. Sealed, held for execution. Here's what most homeowners never realize. An HOA in Arizona can be placed into court-ordered receivership under state statute if there is evidence of financial mismanagement. The receiver is appointed by a judge, takes over all books and accounts immediately, and freezes board authority. That's the legal scalpel. Once the federal indictment's dropped, the receivership petition would already be on the judge's desk. Within 48 hours, The Whitfield board would not just be arrested, it would be administratively dissolved. The fourth piece was the stage. We arranged for 2 unmarked FBI vehicles to be parked at the strip mall directly outside the gate. We arranged for a tactical team to stage at a fire station 4 blocks away. We arranged for Channel 12 News to send a real reporter, not the puff piece producer Heather had invited. The reporter believed she was coming for a tip about HOA misconduct. She had no idea she was coming for an arrest. The fifth piece was Ellie. I was not bringing her into the block party. She would be at her grandmother's in Chandler, eating donuts and watching cartoons. The part of my life I never wanted her to see would play out on a manicured suburban lawn, without her there to witness it. The night before the block party, I sat at my kitchen table and went through the binder one last time. 86 exhibits, 3 affidavits, 1 audio recording, 1 trail camera file showing a rose bush being lopped to a stump. I closed the binder. I poured a glass of bourbon. I drank exactly 2 ounces of it and put the rest back. Then I went to bed and slept for 9 hours, the deepest sleep I'd had in 2 years. When I woke up, I was ready. The Friday before the block party, 3 things happened in quick succession. First, Heather sent a neighbor advisory email to every homeowner on the Cottonwood Hollow distribution list. The subject line read, "Urgent, concerns regarding a Cottonwood Hollow resident." The body of the email named me by name and unit number. It said I had a documented pattern of refusing safety inspections. It said I had displayed aggressive behavior toward community personnel. It said the board had received credible information regarding the nature of his prior employment that residents should be aware of. It encouraged neighbors to exercise caution around me and Ellie. I read the email 3 times. I forwarded it to Lauren, Patricia, and the Channel 12 reporter. I added it to the binder as Exhibit 91A. I went on with my day. The second thing was the fake letter. It arrived at the imaginary employer I'd listed on my HOA registration, a compliance audit firm that didn't actually exist, just a forwarding address controlled by the Phoenix field office. The letter was on Cottonwood Hollow Estates Homeowners Association letterhead, signed by Heather, and addressed to the imaginary HR director of my imaginary employer. It claimed I had been engaging in conduct unbecoming a professional, harassment of community personnel, and behaviors that may warrant employer review. It concluded with a polite request for the firm to consider whether this individual's continued affiliation reflects the values of the company. It was an attempt to get me fired. This is what happens when you give a bored, controlling woman enough institutional cover and enough time. She stops behaving like a community administrator. She starts behaving like a small-town secret police chief. She files complaints with employers. She emails background information to neighbors. She exercises caution. She invents reasons to gather data on private citizens. She does all of this from a saguaro-themed letterhead in 18-point Times New Roman, in the calm voice of someone who has never been told no. The letter went straight to the United States Attorney's Office. It became Exhibit 92A. Tampering with employment under color of false authority is one of those things that quietly stacks up under federal law and looks very ugly to a sentencing judge. The third thing was the gas station. I was filling up at the Quick Trip on Power Road that evening when Hollander pulled in behind me in the SUV with the light bar. He got out. He walked across the lot like a man who'd been practicing the walk in a mirror. He stopped at the rear bumper of my pickup. He put his hand on my truck. "Mr. Brooks, we need a word." I finished pumping. I screwed the gas cap on. I closed the fuel door. Then I turned around and looked at him. "Take your hand off my truck. This is a community matter. This is a gas station in Mesa. Take your hand off my truck." He didn't move it, not because he had a reason, because he wanted to win the moment. Behind him, in the SUV, the younger one was filming on a cell phone. So was I, from the body cam on my shirt. So was the gas station's overhead camera. So was a man pumping his own gas at the next island over, who was openly recording on his iPhone because Hollander's costume was that obvious. "I'm going to ask you one more time." He smiled. He patted my truck once, like a trainer patting a horse, and stepped back. "See you at the block party, sir." He got back in his SUV. He pulled away. I stood there at the pump for a long minute. hand resting on the steel of my tailgate, feeling the heat of the day still radiating off it through my palm. I felt the breath go in and out of my chest. I felt my pulse, steady, slow, patient. He had touched my truck. He had also unknowingly given me the last piece of evidence I needed. Arizona allows for an aggravating sentencing factor when a defendant displays a position of false authority while committing an offense. The hand on the truck, the "see you at the block party," the smile, all of it would land in front of a federal judge inside of 72 hours. I climbed in the cab. I drove home. I called Lauren. He just patted my truck like he owned it. "Tell me you got it on camera." "I got it on 4 cameras. There was a pause. Then she said, "Caleb, we are going to bury her." I closed my eyes. "Yeah," I said, "we are." Saturday morning, October 14th, was the kind of clear Arizona day where the sky looks like it's been freshly Windexed. 62 degrees at sunrise, bone-dry air. The mesquite in my backyard was throwing long, sharp shadows against the gravel. I was on my 4th cup of coffee. Ellie's grandmother had picked her up the night before. The house was quieter than I liked. I had been awake since 4. I had ironed a plain blue button-down. I had laid the binder on the counter, the body cam in my shirt pocket, the badge in the inside pocket of my jacket, where it had been for 9 months. At 7:47, the SUV pulled up to the curb. I watched it from the kitchen window. Hollander stepped out, so did 3 others. They walked up my driveway in a tactical formation that did not belong to any law enforcement training academy in the United States. 2 flanking, 1 behind, 1 in front. Hollander knocked. I opened the door. "Caleb Brooks?" "You know it's me, Travis. You're under arrest for failure to comply with Community Ordinance 414, harassment of community personnel, and obstruction of HOA enforcement authority. Those are not crimes. You're going to come with us peacefully." He held up handcuffs, real handcuffs, but his hand wasn't steady when he raised them. The younger one shifted his weight. The third one had his hand on a sidearm. From the case file, I knew it had been purchased illegally through a private straw buyer in Yuma. I let the silence stretch for 2 seconds. Then I held my wrists out in front of me. "Lead the way, gentlemen." Hollander didn't expect that. None of them did. They had prepared for resistance. They had not prepared for the man who simply offered his wrists. He clicked the cuffs on. He clicked them too tight, partly to assert control, partly because he didn't actually know how to apply restraints. They bit into my skin in a way real cuffs are not supposed to bite. I made a mental note. Exhibit 104-A, excessive force during unlawful detention. I walked between 2 of them down my own driveway, in front of my own house. On a Saturday morning, neighbors started to come out onto their porches in their robes and coffee cups. They watched. Wendell Cantor was on his porch. So was B. Templeton. So were 11 other neighbors who had been quietly briefed by Patricia's office 2 days before. They were not surprised. They were not panicked. They were watching the way an audience watches the curtain rise. Someone 2 doors down lifted a phone and started recording. The SUV door was open. Hollander pushed my head down. Too hard, with no real reason, and I let him. I climbed into the back. The handcuffs dug into my wrists. The vinyl seat was hot. The light bar above the dashboard was flashing red and blue, which is a Class 1 misdemeanor under Arizona Revised Statutes Title 28, Chapter 5. We pulled away from the curb. In the side mirror, I saw a car turn the corner 2 blocks behind us. A dark Suburban, government plates. It kept exactly 4 car lengths back. In the other mirror, a second SUV, silver, unmarked, pulled out from the strip mall across the street. It slid into traffic 3 vehicles behind the first. I had federal protection in 2 directions. I had 4 cameras on me. I had a tactical team staged at the fire station 4 minutes away. I had 86 exhibits in a binder on my kitchen counter and a sealed indictment in a courthouse downtown. And I had Travis Hollander driving me, in handcuffs, to a community block party. At that block party, Heather Whitfield was already standing at a podium under a white tent, microphone in her hand, preparing to give a speech about safety and standards and the importance of strong leadership. She had wanted a public moment. She was about to get one. The SUV turned into the entrance of Cottonwood Hollow Estates. The wrought iron gate swung open. The Saguaro logo on the entry sign caught the morning sun, the same way it had on the day I'd first moved in 8 months ago, the day I'd stood in my driveway with 3 boxes and let her think she had won. I felt no anger. I felt no fear. I felt the dust of the road on my skin. I felt the cuffs tight against my pulse. And I felt the slow, careful satisfaction of a man whose patience has finally arrived at its destination.
The block party was in full swing.
White tents stretched along the closed-off section of Mesquite Way. Strings of fairy lights crisscrossed between palm trees that were nowhere close to needing fairy lights. A catered taco station was sending up the smell of slow-cooked carnitas and grilled lime. Maybe 200 residents milled around with paper plates and plastic cups of sangria. At the center of the largest tent, on a small raised platform draped in maroon HOA banners, Heather Whitfield stood at a microphone. Coral linen blazer and white slacks, golden retriever blonde, freshly highlighted. Every inch the queen of her own Pinterest board. Then the SUV pulled up to the curb. Hollander opened the door and pulled me out by the arm, handcuffed. In front of 200 people, the entire block party went quiet in a single beautiful second. Heather's eyes went wide, then narrow, then triumphant. "Bring him here," she said into the microphone. A path opened in the crowd like a Red Sea joke I won't tell. Hollander walked me up the center of it. Children stopped chasing each other. Phones came out. The Channel 12 reporter, pretty, sharp, mid-30s, already chewing gum at twice her usual speed, moved closer with her cameraman. Hollander pushed me up onto the small platform. I stood there in front of 200 neighbors, in handcuffs, the body cam clipped to my collar, the badge still in my inside jacket pocket, and Heather Whitfield's microphone 6 feet from my face. She tapped the mic. "Neighbors," she said, "this is what happens when one resident decides he is above the rules. When one person believes he can ignore community standards. When one individual disrespects the men and women who keep this neighborhood safe." She turned. She looked at me. The smile she gave me was not a smile a person should give to another person. "This is what happens, Mr. Brooks, when you forget who is in charge." I let her finish. I let her finish the whole sentence. I let the silence settle in. I let the crowd lean forward. Then I said, into the live microphone 6 feet from my face, "Special Agent Caleb Brooks, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Phoenix Field Office, and Heather, you are under arrest." The crowd inhaled in one collective breath. I stepped forward. The handcuffs clinked. Hollander, 3 feet behind me, made a strangled half noise in his throat. "Lauren," I said, calm and clear, into the live microphone, "we're up." For 3 seconds, nothing. For 3 seconds, 200 people stood frozen on a Saturday morning in suburban Arizona, holding paper plates. One cuffed man in a blue button-down looked at one HOA president in a coral blazer. Then, the gates of Cottonwood Hollow Estates blew open. 3 black SUVs came in fast and low from the entrance. 2 more came in from the side service road. A 6th came from the rear gate. I hadn't even known that gate existed, but Lauren had. Tires bit gravel. Doors slammed. Federal agents in dark blue vests with bright yellow letters on the back jogged through the tents. They moved in the kind of disciplined formation that real law enforcement actually uses. The kind that makes compliance officers look like a Halloween bachelor party. Lauren Pierce reached the platform first. She held up her badge for the crowd. FBI. This is a federal arrest. Please remain calm and stay where you are. She turned to Hollander. "Sir, drop the weapon and place your hands on your head." Hollander dropped the weapon and placed his hands on his head. A second agent uncuffed me. The cuffs came off. I rubbed my wrists once. I left the platform and stood at the edge of the tent so Lauren could do what she did best. Lauren walked up to Heather Whitfield. "Heather Diane Whitfield," she said, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit racketeering, and impersonation of a peace officer. You have the right to remain silent." She turned Heather, gently, professionally, hands on her shoulders. She drew her arms behind her back. She clicked real federal cuffs onto wrists that had spent 9 years signing certified letters on saguaro letterhead. She did all of it on a live microphone, in front of 200 neighbors, with a Channel 12 cameraman 6 feet away. Heather's mouth opened. No sound came out. Across the tent, 2 agents were already cuffing Drew Halverson, the treasurer. 12 seconds earlier, he'd been holding a margarita. Another team peeled off toward the Whitfield house at the corner. 40 minutes later, Greg Whitfield would be loaded into the back of a Suburban without his shoes on. Hollander and his 3 compliance officers were lying face down in the gravel beside the Carnitas station. I walked to the edge of the platform. I looked at the microphone. I leaned in. "Folks," I said, "enjoy the rest of your party. We've got the cleanup." I stepped down. The receivership petition was granted on Monday morning at 9:15. By Monday afternoon, a court-appointed administrator named Diane Pittman had taken over the HOA's books, frozen all accounts, and changed every password. By Wednesday, the federal grand jury had unsealed the indictment. By Friday, the first of the seized money, about $1.6 million, had been quietly transferred into a federal restitution account. Over the next 11 months, the rest came in. Real estate liens on the Whitfield's homes in Mesa and Sedona, forfeiture of Greg's 2 trucks and the boat at Lake Pleasant, forfeiture of Heather's Pearl Tahoe, a 6-month mediation that returned every dollar of inflated assessment back to every homeowner in Cottonwood Hollow, with interest. $4.3 million recovered, 291 families repaid, 1 HOA dissolved, restructured, and replaced with an open book board. Wendell Cantor and B. Templeton led the new board, quarterly community meetings, public budgets, and a security force that wore polo shirts and didn't carry stars. Heather Whitfield pleaded guilty 8 months later. She got 6 years federal. Greg got 8. Drew Halverson, the treasurer, cooperated and got 18 months. Travis Hollander was charged with impersonating a peace officer and unlawful use of an emergency light bar. He got 14 months. And a permanent prohibition from any private security work in the state of Arizona for life. The Channel 12 footage went viral. 9 million views in a week. Heather's face, mouth open, blazer slightly off kilter, has spent 2 years circulating across the corners of the internet that enjoy this kind of thing. I won't pretend I don't enjoy it too. Ellie did not see any of it. Not the video, not the news clips, not the Reddit threads. I told her, on the Saturday night after the block party, that the bad neighbors had been asked to leave. I told her she didn't have to worry about anyone bothering her at the pool anymore. She asked if we could plant another rose for Mom. We planted 3. I took the next 4 months off, real leave, paid, signed off by a director who told me I had earned it twice. Ellie and I drove to Sedona. We hiked. We made pancakes on a propane stove in a cabin without Wi-Fi. She started laughing again, the loud kind, the kind I had not heard in 2 years. When I went back to Phoenix field office in the spring, I had 2 things on my desk. The first was a thank you card signed by every adult in Cottonwood Hollow Estates. It had a picture of the new community garden on the front. The garden had been planted on the lot where the Whitfield security shed used to stand. A small bronze plaque at the entrance read, "The Hannah Brooks Memorial Garden, open to all, always." I cried quietly in my office for about 3 minutes. The second was a manila folder. On the tab, somebody had written Palmetto Bay, Florida. I opened it. A photograph fell out, a saguaro-themed entry sign, except the saguaro was a palm tree. The gate was wrought iron, painted seafoam green. The woman on the cover of the homeowner newsletter wore a pearl pink blazer over white slacks. She had golden retriever blonde hair. 246 homes, 6 years on the board. Quarterly treasurer's reports with no itemized expenses. I closed the folder. I picked up my phone. I called Lauren. "You ready to go to Florida?" She laughed. "Tell me when." If you've ever been bullied by an HOA board that thought it ran a small country, drop your story in the comments below. Somebody else needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you don't miss the Palmetto Bay file when it drops. And to the brave neighbors who quietly held the line in Cottonwood Hollow until somebody could finally listen, thank you. Justice doesn't always look like a courtroom. Sometimes it looks like a backyard in spring, with 3 new rose bushes blooming where a stolen kingdom used to stand.
Friends,
Here's the thing about Heather Whitfield. She wasn't powerful. She was loud. For 9 years, she ran Cotton Hollow like her own personal kingdom. She confused volume with authority. She confused fake badges with real ones. And then the quiet single father at the end of her blog turned out to be the one man she should have left alone. Caleb Brooks didn't win with rage. He won with paperwork, with patience, with a yellow legal pad on the kitchen table at midnight, and a binder labeled in masking tape under his bed. Here's the lesson, and it's older than any HOA. Petty power crumbles fast against people who document. If you take the one thing from this story, take that, write it down, save the receipts, trust your gut, and if an HOA has ever bullied you like it thought it ran a small country, drop a story in the comments. Somebody out there needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss out next week, when we follow Caleb to Palmetto Bay, Florida, where another seafoam green gate is hiding a story you won't believe.